And do playback. 1, 2, 1, 2, A, B, C. Roger. And 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Alpha, A, B, C, D. 1, 2, 1, 2.
You get, are you clear?
Am I clear? Who? Roger, slide left a little. Slide to your left a little, chair-wise. Keep going. How's that? And roll
Hi.
Dun, 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 dun. Roger, your dad, Richard, and I quote, said he was born with a silver spoon, had a wonderful childhood, and then he grew up and went to Yale. Now, his junior year, he said, and he had a little ad in the Yale paper, the Yale's highest priced tutor. Talk about that story that he tells.
Well, he likes to think of himself as being the highest priced tutor at Yale. As a matter of fact, the advertising for his tutoring school was Yale's most expensive tutoring school. You may forget the course, but you'll never forget the cost.
What did he do?
Well, the interesting thing is he was guaranteeing that you passed the class if you passed the course if you attended his tutoring school before exams. He had never taken the course himself. He learned the course by studying the books the night before he lectured on them. So at any rate, he did his homework and he was able to guarantee that you passed the course. You didn't, you got your money back. And well, I think it was $20 or $30 an hour, which is a lot of money in those days for passing an exam. That's all I know about it.
Your dad was making some cash in college.
I guess so.
Well, obviously he showed a capacity to lead. After Yale, so many years after, he ends up in the Philadelphia store, the Gimbel store, and he ends up running it for 15 years. But something about your father is so important because of the design of the Philadelphia store that he took over. He did things differently. Talk about the parking, the elevator, etc.
Well, he had a great opportunity, obviously, to build a store from scratch, not have to adapt an existing building. So what he did was he found the newest things and incorporated them into the building of the Gimbel store. For example, he wanted to have on-the-roof parking. So he had the elevators at great cost built at heavier metals and materials that were necessary so that they could support cars, not just people coming up to the roof. And that enabled him to have one of many things, like, for example, he wanted to have suburban stores. I mean, would be an improvement. There was no such thing as a suburban store. There was one department store in the city, and if you lived out of town, you had to come all the way into town. He said there should be stores out there for people, not just a store inside. Those are just a couple of the innovations that he wanted to incorporate in the new store.
There's something about also that he made safety deposit boxes bigger. Explain that.
Well, since he had the opportunity to design the bank that he was going to use, they built a bank called Gimbel Brothers Bank right in the store. So they had, the idea was to, when you came to a Gimbel store, you never had to leave it all day. You'd come there, they'd have coffee for you. You'd have breakfast, you could have lunch, you could have shop, not only shop all day, but you'd have entertainment. They'd have bands there, they'd have an auditorium. And in the evening, they'd even have shows in the evening to keep you around as long as you could. It was such an obvious thing that wasn't done before. It made a huge amount of money too, I must say, keeping people in the store for that amount of time.
Especially keeping the bank in there too. The money's in the house.
But you asked me another question, I think.
No, you didn't. I liked what your answer was. That was good because that was about the safety deposit boxes, which of course were part of the bank.
Well, he made them a little larger than usual because he thought since he was an officer of the bank, he would keep his rare book manuscripts there, and they should be a little bigger than the normal little box. So he built huge safety deposit boxes, huge in the sense of they would hold certain size manuscript, whatever that was, 12 by 14 or something. And it served a purpose later on, but at any rate, it was a custom-made thing for his customers, and of course the management of Gimbel's too.
Your dad, of course, Richard, and your granddad was Ellis A. At the dedication of the Philadelphia store, Ellis A. and your dad had you there as a 1-year-old presenting flowers to the female governor of Wyoming.
I remember it very well.
Something about that, forget you being 1, but it was very important for your father and your grandfather to make this store in some ways about womankind.
I thought you were going to tell me he shoved me into places like that when I was 1 year old and was constantly bugging me as time went on to be in places where it were difficult to hang in there. Yeah, that's true. Whatever else you said is not true.
We'll get to the part of him shoving you places in a bit. But talk about your father, though, and your grandfather and their vision as far as the store. Hiring young girls, giving them jobs, a safe place to be. Fashion from Paris for the women to shop. It was about women, and they did make a conscious effort to make sure the Gimbel store was a woman-friendly store.
Well, I think they were very successful at that. They went for the highest fashion they could import, fashion shows. If there were movies being planned, they got the talent in the store by giving them some award for outstanding acting according to Gimbel's, whatever it might be. And the idea of having all these departments in a store, all these various things like that you now have in a mall, let's say, were really within the store. They had gardens, they had restaurants, not one, but many different restaurants in some of the bigger stores. And it was a first thing of its kind that showed that much service to the customer, particularly women.
Sitting here right now, what's the first memory that comes back to Roger Gimbel about that store in Philadelphia?
I didn't hear you on that.
Sitting here right now, what's the first memory that comes back to you about that store that you're talking about in Philadelphia?
Well, I think it was the size that overwhelmed you. I was brought there on occasion to visit my father. I would go to the barber shop and get a haircut. People would rustle my blonde, curly hair. And I hated that. And then I would move to the elevators and I'd go to the bookstore and get ice cream in the ice cream store. I remember all those things. I don't remember much about the management of the store or seeing my father in those circumstances. I don't think he paid too much attention when I visited. I wasn't looking for attention. I was looking to see if I could get free cake or cookies or something.
One thing I know you do recall is when your grandfather and father, when they had the Barnum and Bailey Circus came to town, and they had the orphans. Talk about that.
Well, one of the things that my grandfather came up with was the idea of taking orphans to the circus. People who'd never been to a circus, had much in life at all. I think the idea of taking 10,000 is a lot of orphans. Even to find 10,000 orphans with a job, he took 10,000 to the circus, and all of us grandchildren were the waiters and brought everybody free popcorn and all this stuff. So the first day of the Barnum and Bailey Circus was nobody was permitted but orphans. So you had thousands of orphans in there, and we couldn't tell the difference between an orphan and an ordinary person, but he could.
And what was your job?
My job, I knew sooner or later he'd call me to make a speech of some kind. So I was living in fear of what he'd say. And now, my grandson, Roger Gimbel, is going to give a an award to the finest orphan of the year, the one who's done most for other orphans. Now here he is. And I wasn't ready for any of this, but I knew he was going to do it. And I say, here was about my speech. Here's your prize. It infuriated him. And I had to come back the next year and do it right.
There was one thing you mentioned to me. I want you to talk about again. The cannon at the event, and your sister. I think you said it was Sally. Were kind of in cahoots to get to you.
Well, the thing that I hated about that backstage visit is when they try and, my father, somebody thought it would be a good scary thing if they put me in the cannon and sent me out to the net. So that a bunch of clods lifted me up and shoved me in the cannon. They didn't fire it, obviously, but it scared the living daylights out of me. Hated that.
And did your sister ever get in the cannon also?
Oh, she loved that kind of thing. I mean, she would have let him shoot him out of the cannon as far as that's concerned, but I had 5 sisters. Not all of them were as brave as my sister Joyce.
Oh, so Joyce was the one who was the one.
I'll do it, Daddy. I'll do it.
Makes you look bad.
Does indeed.
One thing on women that I want you to talk about is the you mentioned the jobs. What was that about young girls getting jobs at a Gimbel's?
Well, I think one of the innovations that department stores developed as time went on, since they started, was the use of inexpensive help that couldn't get a job elsewhere. And I think the Gimbel store promoted women for that job as much as they could. You have to imagine that the average child of 17, 18, having come out of high school, there weren't many jobs open for women, if any. The idea of working in a department store was clean, well-lit, supervised, policed, and you could go there in the morning and come home in the evening, and you could get that same person for $2 a day. It was good for the store. It was good for the younger people in the family who wanted a job and couldn't get it. Younger women, I'm referring to.
Your dad's philosophy, which was his way, his entire profession. You stay with family. The strong in the family will support the weak in the family. What was it about Richard that had that mindset?
Well, I don't know. He was very much, you're referring to, I'm sure, the fact that the strong should support the weak. He liked having a big family. He had 5 children. He encouraged that. My mother would have had all the children that he wanted. He originally thought he wanted about a dozen children because he heard Charles Dickens had 12 children, which wasn't true. I mean, he had ideas. And so he was anxious to build a big family. That's about all I can say on that subject. I didn't get to vote in that.
There's something about, obviously, just you mentioned he had 5 children. He comes from a family of 7 brothers. There was a surplus of Gimbels around. That's why it was so successful running the stores.
Well, I think it was a wonderful idea that the strong should support the weak. And even though not every Gimbel was a genius at merchandising, the idea of using, forgot what I was going to say.
We're talking about the surplus of Gimbels. Your dad having 5 kids, him coming from 7 siblings. There was enough Gimbels around to run things. It seemed to be a positive that there's so many Gimbels, and your father's idea.
Well, it made an impression. Let's say business people would come to the store and visit with the Gimbel brothers. When you went to a meeting with them, 6 or 7 guys would come into the room and they were all Gimbels. What chance did you have? They'd pat you on the back, maybe some a little hard, and pretty soon you came around to the feeling that you ought to make the deal with them. That was the way it was.
It's kind of like the mafia.
Not quite.
We haven't mentioned this. Saks. How did Saks become part of the Gimbel family?
Well, when the store property was purchased in New York where they were going to build the New York store, one of the people, they wanted to clear the whole block. There was already a store in that block called Saks 34th Street. I think it was called the full name then. And they couldn't get him out. So they decided, Mr. Saks that is, so they decided that they'd flatter him by moving the store uptown and keeping the 34th Street working too, so they would have two stores, Saks 34th Street and Saks Fifth Avenue. And that's the way it turned out. That's why they picked up the 34th Street store to begin with. Gimbel's was at 34th Street already, but they didn't have that one properties. So they couldn't put up the same lights they wanted, the same was a nuisance.
Fascinating. That's how Saks Fifth Avenue became.
As far as I know, I could be 100% wrong, but I think that's all I can remember at the moment.
No, we've got it on tape. It's perfect. It's legit. It's factual.
Good.
Which leads me now to your dad's brother, Bernard, or his cousin Bernard. The flip side of what your dad felt, he felt efficiency first. Genes, family genes mean nothing.
Well, I don't think nothing is true, but I think the idea that the family was around and present and supportive was very encouraging to all members of the family. With Bernard, at least I was told this, that he was really interested in efficiency and making. He lived in New York now, moved from Philadelphia to New York, and the Wall Street people got to him. I think they wanted to make as much money as possible. That meant giving people less salary and this and that and so forth. And so he was very anxious to make it an efficient store, and at the sacrifice of jobs for the family. And he and my father just didn't agree on that.
That, of course, led to a proxy war, I think, in 1936.
Actually, yeah, that proxy war.
I mean, you were 11 and 12 years old when this is going on. What did you know about it then, or what do you know about it now as far as what happened? Because your dad is quoted as saying, I knew I was going to lose, but I wanted to fight anyway.
Well, sometimes he got lucky. That's what usually happened. And he liked the fight more than he liked the battle. I mean, the winning of it. And so the idea that he could be in a position where he could fight for what he believed was important, he would go for the fight, and the publicity attendant to that. At least that's my impression of why he did it.
And I hear a plane overhead, which leads me now to you going to Florida. Your father couldn't fly as an executive with the Gimbel family, but once he lost that proxy war, you moved to Florida, and he can take flying lessons. Talk about that, your dad's love of flying.
Well, I'm not sure where it actually started, but I know he was fascinated by airplanes and always talked about maybe learning to fly. And then he met this Flying Dutchman, as the guy was called, who ran us an airfield near where we lived. It's called the Flying Dutchman Air Service, naturally. And he started taking flying lessons, got his license, and he was off on a career of flying, is what it amounted to.
There was something that he says in his days in Philadelphia to promote the store, he had the first intercity plane race going on between Philadelphia and New York. Do you recall that at all?
Well, I remember there were races for private pilots. I mean, there was a race in any event, public event, that Gimbel's could look like it sponsored or did sponsor. It was good for business in the store. It got a lot of publicity and so forth. The main thing I remember about that whole thing was that Governor Earl of Pennsylvania used to fly in these.
Sorry, hold that thought. Came home.
Rolling?
We were discussing the proxy war, and you're a young kid, but at times it almost seemed as though Dad got roughed up, and you saw it.
Got roughed up, did you say? I'll say. It's no fun seeing your father come home beat up and blackjacked for trying to enter the store that bore his name. But he was that kind of a guy. He was tantalizing the people to come after him. When they did, then he, right like hell, and sued him. I mean, he never knew what he was going to do, but he did get beat up pretty bad once, and he stayed in his bed, I know, for a week. We didn't know what was wrong. We were allowed to come in and see our bandaged up father. But it didn't bother him at all. It was just he deserved it, he said, for what he did. He was going back to find something he left there 20 years ago or something. I don't remember the whole situation, but is that what you're talking about?
Your dad seemed to like to tweak a little bit, if he could.
If necessary.
Let's go to Florida, because you've moved down there. He stayed in the business. Talk about the store that he took over, and he renamed Richards.
Yeah, well, that was an opportunity for him. He hadn't worked in several years, and he was able to go back, and they named the store Richards after him, and he took over the store, and he had a good time running it.
You're fourth generation, Gimbel family. Ever work in the Gimbel store?
Never.
How come?
Nobody offered me a job. I think that's the main reason.
What store did you work in?
I never worked in a store, department store of any kind. Well, that's not true. I worked as an elevator man for Richard's department store for one summer. Didn't like that job at all. It convinced me never to work in a department store.
Your cousin Paul, I think you mentioned, actually did work.
Paul worked in a department store in New Jersey, one of Gimbel's.
Yeah.
His father was my father's first cousin, L.S.A. Gimbel Jr. I think the reason the Gimbels or anybody else for that matter didn't like working in department stores for men, you had to work 6 days a week. Saturday was a working day, and most jobs for executives and so forth, or even salesmen, were 5-day-a-week jobs in that time of those years. So that had no attraction at all at the time, besides all the stuff, the frantic stuff we saw going on around us led us to believe this is not a good place to work.
Staying in Florida. You did some, I believe, in Maine, but you've mentioned in the past that sailing really grabbed you when you were in Miami. How come?
Well, I have to think about that for a second or two. First of all, we had a house. My father bought a house on the water. And naturally, I and my sister, we all wanted a boat so we could go up and down the canal and go into the ocean from there. And so I got started on that. Eventually, one thing led to another, and I got a sailboat, and I read a book called Sailing Alone Around the World by Joshua Slocum, and that appealed to me. So I got the book and got this sailboat that my father found. Pitiful sailboat that it was. It was cheap, so he bought it for me. And I learned to sail on it with the book. After school, I would take the book out and learn the various maneuvers. There were no teachers. There were no yacht clubs where I lived in Miami. There was nobody who knew anything about sailing, so I learned from this book, which seems impossible since the guy was sailing alone around the world, but somehow it inspired me to do it. And I did find out that my father bought the boat for an amazingly low price many years later. I was in Essex, Connecticut, and in my own boat. By that time I'd gotten able to get my own boat. And I was having a cup of coffee on the boat with a man who said, you remember the Gimbel that he sold the boat to. He said, what a fool he was. He said, we were taking the boat, which was built 1/4 of an inch too big all around, so it could, even though it looked like a racing boat, it could never win a race. It was just too heavy. He said, I sold it to him for $75, the fool, and then he drove it down to Florida to give it to his son. Then I knew why I never won a race, and I had a great excuse.
The reason I want more, I like talking to you about sailing is because it became, it became a passion for you. There's a perseverance in the Gimbels. Your great-grandfather, your grandfather, your father, you, when it comes to sailing, you sailed Cape Horn. To sailors, that's the Mount Everest of climbing.
Going around Cape Horn.
Exactly. So talk about the idea of taking that challenge on.
Well, it seemed like a wonderful idea when I looked into it and was able to I started reading stories about doing the necessary research on Cape Horn, and I found out that the exciting way to go, that is against the wind, was from west to east. Or was it east to west? I think it was to sail around Cape Horn, going from east to west was the correct way. So we got a hold of a friend of a friend of a friend who was taking his boat around the world. We asked him if he was going to go around Cape Horn, the direction we wanted to go. Some friends of mine, we just went ahead and did it. We chartered the boat for a week or two and went around the Horn.
Kind of like your dad, wanted to learn how to fly, just went ahead and did it with the Dutchman.
Well, I prepared much more than my father did, I'll tell you that.
Your dad and his flying. You were a kid. He's in the plane with you. He falls asleep. Tell me that story, please.
Well, he was very trusting. In thinking about it, he just leaned across and said, I think I want to take a nap now, Roger. Would you take over the plane for a while? Well, I don't think I was very old. I don't know what it was, 9 or 10, if that. I did know how to fly a bit because he showed me how to keep a compass course and stuff like that. And I knew how to keep the plane straight and level if nobody else was around. So I just did it. He went quickly snoring off to sleep, and I'm flying the plane. And then finally I see another plane in sight, and I thought maybe something I should ask him about, how to deal with this important challenge that faced me. And I went like this to him and shook him. He woke up and said, what are you doing here? Where are we? What's that plane doing there? And he pushed me aside like this and took over the plane. I'm just following instructions, sir, I said. And then he showed me about wind drifting the plane to one side, all the little touches. And that was the sort of thing he'd do. Take a nap, but he trusted you to fly, and God knows why.
Well, speaking of trusting you, there was one time about 4 o'clock in the morning or 4:30 in the morning, he woke you up to go find his plane. What the hell was that all about?
Well, he bought a 2-seater plane that he flew around for a while. This is before he went into the Air Force. And he was flying it down from Philadelphia to Miami, where we lived. And I guess what happened was, it got late and the lights started to go down, and he knew he had no lights for flying the plane at night. He had no idea whether the airports were lit at night that he was going to land at. One was the Miami airport, which he figured would be lit, and there was another one close by. And finally, it got dark very quickly. He said, you want to take a chance of going anywhere? So he went out in the Everglades and landed on this island, which had a flat enough place that he'd get the plane down. And then he scooted back so he could tell my mother that he was alive. She wasn't worried about it. Didn't even know he was flying down there. Woke me up, drove us out to it. Finding the plane was impossible. Well, how could you find a plane when you didn't see where it landed? An island in the Everglades. Anyway, we found it. Luck was with us. And he then said, I don't think I can take off with you aboard. You stay here with the car, and if you have any trouble with Indians or alligators or any sort of thing, just lock the door and stay in. I'll come back and get you, hopefully before dark. Goodbye.
Yeah, that's a good thing to say to your son if you have trouble with Indians or alligators.
Well, I didn't have trouble with either one, fortunately. But it was a bad day, a very hot day spent in a tropical situation where I remember the Indians coming over and rocking the car. That was scary. Outside of that, it was cinch.
Yeah. How old were you, by the way? Around.
I would say 12 or 13, somewhere in there.
No. What's a bunch of Indians to a 14-year-old, right?
You could get a driver's license when you were 13 in Florida when I was growing up.
So you were flying at 10. What's the big deal, right?
Right.
You mentioned the war. World War II, you were one of the youngest pilots in the war. Your dad was one of the oldest pilots.
Never thought of that before. You're right.
Were you guys competitive?
With him? No.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't trying to do the same things that he was at all. He was jealous of me because I had real pilot's wings and he had service pilot wings, a distinction which any Air Force person watching this will definitely understand the difference. But he and I had very little rivalry when it came to flying. The only thing is he backed into it and I went into it front-wise.
He came to visit you once when he was a colonel, I believe, and you were flying the A-20 bomber, which seats one person. But you took him for a flight.
Well, I did take him for a flight to show off a little bit. I remember putting him on this platform behind my head. It was right over the bomb bay. It was a narrow platform like so. And you could lie on you weren't allowed to take an extra pilot up, but I said, if you lie down here, you're not afraid to fly with me. You can't have a chute. I have a chute. You have no chute. Anything happens, you're on your own. I said, I can't help you. He said, you'd like to do that, so I put this helmet underneath his chin and gave him a ride that I don't think he'll ever forget. And I opened the bomb bay. It was freezing outside. And his chin hit the bottom. And when he got out of the plane, he said, I had a wonderful trip. And he was bloody. And he was, I think I got even for a lot of things that I thought he'd done to me as a child.
I went for the cannon, the roller coasters, the falling asleep while.
Supposed to toughen you up those kinds.
Did they?
No.
Come on. After the war, there's something that is interesting to me. You had to fly back. I want to hear about you flying your plane home from the war by yourself.
Well, for some reason, I got orders to take one of I was then a more experienced pilot with 41 missions, 9 missions as a fighter bomber pilot. And we had a small crew, usually 2 or 3 people. And I was thinking about that the other day because I had no idea what I was going to do. I was just to deliver the plane, and I made up a route, and I flew to Africa on the north coast, and then finally went around to Gibraltar and landed at different 1 or 2 places along the way. And then they asked me if I would like to try and set a record across the Atlantic for twin-engine plane so this could be used. So you could skip Ascension Island, which was the midpoint where you normally landed, to fuel up again to cross the central Atlantic, I guess you'd call it. The only thing I could think of was to just do it. So we got down to this, I'm trying to think of that puzzle, I can't remember the name of the airfield we were at. But I did fly across the Atlantic alone and missed the airport I was headed for and landed at another one, which I had no idea what its name was. It's kind of strange when you get out of a plane, you ask, where are you? To a guy, he said, this guy is the stupidest guy I ever met. He landed the plane here, he doesn't know where he is. But it was true, I didn't know where I was. But I had done it in 6 hours and 55 minutes, which was then very short period for crossing the Atlantic in a bomber.
So where were you when you landed the plane? Ultimately, did you found out?
Brazil.
Okay.
I'm trying to, the reason I'm puzzled is I can't remember the names of the cities anymore. But this was a small airport that I landed at. Actually, I think I landed on the taxiway by mistake and got down that way, but I safely made it back to the States.
Did you ever fly again?
No. Not military. Military. That was my last. The Korean War was coming along. I had enough credits to get out, and I was happy to get out of the Air Force then.
You're like, the hell with this. I just landed in the wrong country. I'm not going to go fly again. I want to get to Yale now with your family, because before we get to Yale, you were in Florida going to high school. Were you forced to go to Taft for a year?
No, I wasn't forced. It was suggested. That I wanted to go to Yale, I better go to a decent school. Not just a school where between periods you had a dance hall in the school, jukebox in the school, you danced between periods. And he said, you'll never get into Yale that way. I had no idea. So he was, fortunately, the guy who ran the Taft School was a classmate of my father's when he was at Yale. So he had a little pull and got me in. That's how it gave me a good start. I went there for a year and was able to get into Yale, taking 2 years in one. That's how that happened.
Which leads me to Yale, because it seems your father had gone there, you went there. Was it somewhat expected in the Gimbel family that you'd go to Yale because those before you went there?
No, not at all. Not at all. Some of them, there wasn't any feeling that I knew of. There was that. I mean, the only college I'd ever, when I was down isolated in Miami, Florida, you don't hear much about Yale down there, so I knew nothing about it. Remember, there was no television and no radio and not much communication with kids outside of the jukebox and the dance floor.
Your dad's books. When you were younger, I know that you went on a number of trips with him when he was going to buy books. What was that like, being in a car with Dad as he went in and perused stores?
Well, he bought a lot of books. He was interested in having a library that had everything in that field he was collecting. If he was collecting flights across the Atlantic, he'd want to get every book and every book by the person who wrote it. Thousands of books he collected. He filled 2 row houses in Philadelphia with books right to the ceiling. And my job when I was with him was he'd buy the books and then I was to carry them to the car. His back always hurt when it came to carrying books. So, but his style in buying books really impressed me. He'd go over and he'd say, this is a book I want, to the owner. The owner would say he wants $10 for it. He said, well, how about all the books on this shelf? Can I have them? How much would that be? That's why I got to sit and add it up. My father said, no, I'll give you $20 for the whole shelf. Whole shelf. I won't do. So then he'd go buy some other things and run a bill up to maybe $50, $60, and then he'd say, well now, aren't you tired of being a bookseller? I'd like to buy all the books in the store. What do you say? The guy would say, I can't make a living. He said, I'll take half the books in the store. Now what I haven't said to you is that the reason my father was going through this whole business, he saw a book within that old maneuver that he wanted. It was worth much more than he would pay to buy the store. He was offered to buy the store. So he would buy that half the store, and my job was to take it out and put it in the car.
Sometimes only for one book that he knew was special.
That's right. It was a style of his own.
He collected, he had 4, from what I can gather, 4 different distinct collections. One of them, though, was Edgar Allan Poe. And you talked about books filling up 2 row houses in Philadelphia. Your dad actually bought Edgar Allan Poe's house in Philadelphia and made it a museum. Talk about that.
Well, that was it was the actual house he lived in there, I think when he wrote The Raven. And my father was very content there until the local newspaper in Philadelphia made him open it to the public, which he didn't want to do. And they forced him to do that in order to keep the store, to keep their house. But he decided now that he had the house, he'd fix it up like it was in Poe's day. And he did various things to it. Unfortunately, when he invited the newspaper people to come visit the store, the first guy took the step down the kitchen steps, fell and broke his arm. And that was the end of our great public relations buy of the Poe House in Philadelphia, but it did become a museum. And there was even a unknown story of Poe was published that had never been published that was found in that house, according to my father. And some people thought that he wrote it himself, which I guarantee you he didn't. But it became quite a story to find it. I forget how many years it was after Poe's death, but a considerable time to find a story that had never been seen before and he found in the house. Who wrote it, how it got there is still a mystery.
There's a story at that museum that Richard Gimbel hired some producer from NBC to make a record of a parakeet saying nevermore, as if it was a raven. Do you know this story by chance?
Well, I know that he wanted very much to have a bird that would say nevermore, like the raven. And he went to see, in his customary fashion, all kinds of bird trainers to find out what the correct thing to do. They said, start off with a small bird, try and get him to do it. Be much more inexpensive. Well, first he got a canary. Well, everybody knows you can't teach a canary to talk. He thought he'd give that a try. So he practiced. When I'd get up early in the morning, he'd be sitting on the steps to the living room with his canary sitting there and said, nevermore, nevermore, nevermore. Go away, Roger. Nevermore. So finally he worked up to, I think, a parakeet or next size bird to a parrot. And he started on that. And the parrot remembered things, but the only thing the parakeet could remember, unfortunately, was the song of the canary. So he tweeted like a canary. He never learned how to say nevermore. That was a fiasco, that one.
Did you ever make any kind of album for him?
No.
No. Okay. That same guy.
What he did do was he did have Charles Dickens had a stuffed raven when he wrote his first mystery book. He had 7 children also, Charles Dickens. And when the raven, the pet raven they had died, Dickens had it stuffed so that his children would stop crying about the raven. My father thought it was something he had to have. So he went over to London looking for the raven, and he found it. Stuffed raven was in an antique store. He bought it back. And whenever he gives a story about Edgar Allan Poe, an exhibition of his books and so on, he tries to borrow the raven that he once owned. And he puts it in the collection and tells the story about the raven, which is true. And so that's the story of the raven and how it got to be in the story.
You're the NBC guy, being you. What were you doing? What was your job then?
You mean
You're a producer.
what show was I producing?
I'm guessing probably the Tonight Show.
Tonight. Well, the Tonight Show was not the first show I did, but I was doing the Tonight Show for a while, and that got to be tiresome.
There's a great picture of you, and I've read about it, fishing off your 18th floor into the East River.
Oh yeah.
What the hell are you doing?
Well, I was lucky enough to get an apartment that I thought would be a good fishing place on the East River. It was the first apartment house built over the East River Drive in New York. And it seemed to me it was about 220 feet down. But if you were, that's not long for a fishing reel. You'd have 200 or 300 feet. So I started using, trying out, casting out the window into the East River. And people actually were able to catch fish along eels up further in the East River. I thought I could try for eels, so I studied eels, and I came back and started catching them out of my apartment store window until people complained about it. And then New Yorker magazine did a story on it. And I appeared with a martini in one hand and a fishing rod in the other, saying that this was anyway, they did a springtime story about me fishing out of my East River apartment. But it was true, I did do that.
It seems to me that there's a little bit of your father in you.
Could be.
Rolling, and action.
We were discussing about you flying the Atlantic. First of all, how old were you when this happened?
I was 19,
Say that again.
17, 18, 19.
Crossing the Atlantic on your own.
Well, it was part of a schedule that I was fulfilling, delivering the plane back to the States for fitting out for Korea.
All right, so talk about now where you began and where you ended up.
I began in Naples, Italy. I flew to North Africa, and then around by Gibraltar, and then to the final jump-off place was where the mainland was closest to Brazil. And I was flying towards, trying to go to Natal. I missed Natal and landed in Fortaleza, though I didn't know it was Fortaleza at the time.
How did you find out?
Well, there was a guy there that came out to put gas in my plane after he was stunned that I didn't know where I was. Of course, he was also trying to put gasoline, oil in the gas tank, which wasn't exactly helpful. Having stopped him to that, at least found out where I was Fortaleza I'd never heard of. I thought I was landing at Natal all the time. That's a confusing explanation if you ever heard one.
So at least you were in the right country.
That was about the best I could do.
All right, I want to get to your dad now again. 1951, he went back to Yale. Why did he go back to Yale? What was that all about?
Well, the government, he was old enough to retire as a regular Air Force officer, and the government offered him retirement and an ROTC job at Yale, teaching ROTC to Yale students. They had an air division, Army Air Force section there. So he was delighted to go back there and very anxious to get involved in developing his library as a civilian. That's what, in fact, he did.
So what do you mean developing the library? At this time, how many collections did he have?
Well, he had the Edgar Allan Poe collection, the Charles Dickens collection, the aviation collection, which developed over the few years before he retired at Yale. There were over 130,000 items in the aviation collection, which eventually went to Yale. By the way, everybody wanted it, but the condition was if you wanted the aviation collection, you had to itemize it. $130,000 item, nobody was willing to do that for nothing. The other condition was you had to build a separate wing. Well, the Air Force said, we'll build a separate wing and we'll itemize the file cards on every item in there. And they're still doing it, 130,000 items.
So the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs has its own wing for your dad's collection.
Yeah, I'd call it more of a niche, but it's considered a wing.
Is it beautiful?
I think so. It's tremendous in size. 130,000 books takes up a lot of room in prints and all kinds of things.
How upset was Yale when they didn't get that collection?
They were furious. Having put up my father for years as a curator of aeronautics at Yale, they didn't get it.
But what did they get?
They got the Dickens collection,
Okay.
which was good, and they got the Payne collection, which was superb.
And Poe is at the
Poe
museum.
went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And whatever else was left, was probably kept at home. I don't know.
Cut on that 1 second. I do want to follow up one thing. The aeronautic rolling.
Rolling and action.
Rolling.
The aeronautic collection that you speak of, that your dad began building when he was serving, how did they get that moved around? He's an officer.
Well, the rules say in the Air Force, as you change bases, they allow you to take all your possessions to the next job, and including any items pertaining to literature of your profession as a pilot or whatever it may be. So he had 2 trucks pull up, and his possessions as an airman, so to speak, was 120,000 items, whatever it was at that particular time. The government moved it all for nothing to the next air base. For example, he moved to Michigan from the center of the United States, and they moved it all there where he was working on it all the time.
They could not have been happy with that rule.
Well, just to say 120,000 takes 3 seconds, you know.
That's incredible. In New Haven, when your dad was back at Yale, curator and all, it's almost like there's another family there. Your twin sisters are 20 years younger than you. What was it like visiting your kid sisters?
Well, it was strange because a lot of people thought that the 2 girls, twin sisters, not a lot of people, but some people thought that they were mine, and I was covering it up by running away and getting married and letting my mother take care of the 2 children. Now the twins, Pat and Pam, God bless them, they hate me to say this, but it made a good story, even though it wasn't true.
There was a time back in the Philadelphia store, you were saying earlier, they had everything in there. They had the bank, and they had every restaurant and department you could think of. They also had a radio station. WIP is very important because the Gimbels, your grandfather to your father, had that first transatlantic transmission from the store. Talk about that.
True. Well, I don't know how it happened, but it's a wonderful photograph, as far as I'm concerned, of my father talking to my grandfather across the Atlantic on the first telephone line from Philadelphia to, I think it was New York or Paris. I'm trying to remember.
I think your father was in London.
He was in London talking to the store in Philadelphia.
Got it.
That's
And
correct.
where was he in London? Where was your dad in London?
Well, why was he there?
What was there that he was talking from?
I think he was probably, the Gimbel store had a branch there, a buying branch. They were buying items for the store to be sold in New York and other places.
It's always good to have a good address in London, right?
You bet.
Your cousin Peter,
Great guy.
Bernard's son.
Yeah.
Talk about getting to know him, because you were mentioning earlier that the Philadelphia Gimbels and the New York Gimbels didn't really know each other.
No, I was at Yale and met Peter Gimbel for the first time. We were both there at the same time. And also another cousin on my mother's side, the same situation. I met another first cousin that I didn't know I had on my mother's side. So Yale was very prolific when it came to family tuning up, so to speak.
So the Gimbels went to Yale.
Yeah.
Talk about Peter and your relationship, because obviously you didn't meet until you guys were college guys.
Well, Peter was interested. I was already a television producer and film producer, and Peter had more or less stopped diving. At least he wasn't diving as much as he used to, and we decided to work together and do a film about a certain group in Brazil, which the film never happened, but we got to be friends over that particular piece of film. And we became friends, and he died at an early age, seems to me, but very, very good guy, very heroic interesting guy who did the book called, I forget, it's about sharks. And he was the first guy to swim among sharks while they were feeding, which is not where I want to be.
The Gimbels take chances.
Blue Water White Death and The Sinking of the Andrea Doria.
Yeah, I want to.
Get those in.
So the book was called
The
Blue Water, White Death.
Blue Water White Death was the movie.
The Peter Gimbel book, which became a movie, was called Blue Water White Death. And that was a wonderful photograph taken from inside of a cage looking at a bunch of hungry sharks trying to yip another friend of ours, Peter Lake. And we were all very lucky to have remembrances of that thing where you could actually talk to people, not count the damage.
What is it about the Gimbels and the taking chances? I don't care what side of the family you're from.
Well, it's all relative. If you don't think you're taking a big chance, then it's not a problem. We didn't always think we were taking a chance. We were not the brightest that evaluated it.
Wasn't Peter also pretty famous for photographing the Andrea Doria, correct?
Yes, he was the first photographer down to the Andrea Doria and took wonderful shots of the Andrea Doria at the bottom after it went down. And he became a famous reporter, photographer at that time. He was always a good underwater diver.
It's interesting, the company you keep, his sister Carol, if I'm correct, was married to Hank Greenberg,
That's right.
the baseball player.
That's right.
What was Hank like? Did you ever have a chance to meet him?
I did. I loved him. He's a wonderful guy. I met him through some relatives of the May family who were relatives of mine as well. And he couldn't have been nicer and more interesting to talk to, Hank Greenberg.
No. Let me ask these couple questions of you right now. You're warmed up. This is just to you. Who was, in your opinion, Richard Gimbel?
I don't know how to answer it.
I know.
He was just a man who was very bright, and enjoyed adventure, and was always thinking of interesting places to go or things to do. That's what I think he was best at.
All right then. Who is Roger Gimbel?
A spin-off. I'm just a humble follower in his tracks, so to speak. Not wanting to do the same things, and we didn't do the same thing. But I love my father very much.
As a son, father, family, what does the Gimbel name mean to you?
Well, that was a very powerful name when I was growing up. It meant a lot to me. It meant a lot of trouble mostly, but when I wasn't being kidded about it, it was sort of fun to go through the growth and explore it a bit.
Stop camera.
Okay, now rolling.
Rolling. And action.
Roger, when I say your last name, Gimbel, what's your first thought?
Must be home.
Meaning?
It's the only place they call me Gimbel.
Come on. No one else calls you Gimbel.
No,
Growing up then with the last name, did it mean anything to you?
nothing special. Just everybody had a last name. I had one too.
In retrospect, anything different? Has it grown on you in any different way because of that name?
Sometimes people charge me more when they hear the name. That's what you mean? Yes.
It's not what I mean. I never know. No one's ever charged a Moriarty more for anything, let me tell you. Ellis A., your grandfather.
Right.
When I mentioned that, the first thought that comes to your mind, your first memory of your grandfather.
Distinguished old gentleman with gray mustache, white mustache, very imposing man who always walked around the store saying the customer's always right, give him what he wants. He was a great talker, a great giver, Very interesting man.
What were his stories about his family to you as a young boy?
You know, I never talked to him about that, about his early years. I talked to him about his current projects, like taking 10,000 orphans to the circus. He did that every year. Or he didn't do it, but his Gimbel Brothers store did it, and he was the representative for them. And that comes to mind right off the bat.
How old were you when you realized what he was doing?
Well, I knew he was taking orphans to the circus. The thing I didn't know was that in the middle of the circus, he'd say, "Now my grandson Roger is going to give a short speech presenting the prize to the Orphan of the Year." I was terribly embarrassed and tried to hide and cry and crawl out of it, but he insisted on coming out and making a speech and giving a present to the Orphan of the Year.
How old were you when that happened?
I have no idea. I was old enough that I should have listened to him and done what he said. He was not nice to me if I didn't do that.
What did he do?
Well, he'd just do it again. I played golf with him when I was maybe 10, 11 years old. And if I beat him, he'd say, "How'd you do that?" I said, "Well, I thought about the Orphan of the Year, and I imagined that fellow was the Orphan of the Year. Now he's going to be the Caddy of the Year. You got a present for him too?" That kind of thing.
So, do your recollections of your grandfather begin with him kind of putting you front and center, calling you out and having you do things, challenging you?
Yes, that was sort of the bylaw in the Gimbel family, challenging everybody to do something bigger and better.
Did you see that or hear that from him as far as his brothers were concerned? Because at one time there was 7 of them.
Well, you mean the cousins,
Well, his brothers.
his brothers? Well, he didn't have 7 brothers,
But there were 7 boys. He had 6 brothers.
6 brothers.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of what your question is now. I don't know if
Well, was there something about that with Ellis A. because he's your grandfather, but there's 6 other Gimbel boys who were part of the Gimbel family at that time that really began Gimbel's Brothers stores. Was there something about Ellis that you saw him interacting with other brothers when you were little?
No, I never saw him with any of his brothers that I remember. He was the youngest in the family. A great number of them were dead before I had a chance to meet them. He was a very imposing man. That was I was a little afraid of him, I think, because he was big and threatening always.
Is it safe to say he was full of life?
Importance.
Meaning?
He felt very important to me. I don't know how else to say it. He was not a man that you took lightly. He asked you to do something you did in a hurry.
You talked about importance for him in the store. What's Roger Gimbel's first memory of the store?
Well, I guess the first memory I have is being maybe 5 or 6 years old and going to the store with my mother or my father, and people would ruffle my hair and say, "You look just like a Gimbel." I hated that. I didn't know what that meant. I went to every department when I stopped there, somebody would go, "Hello there, Mr. Gimbel." That was supposed to make me like him or something. I was not very pleased with that whole motion. So I didn't like going to the store with my family for that reason, when I was 5 or 6 years old.
Now, were you walking around the store with both Ellis A. and your father Richard?
It's possible. I don't remember doing that particularly, but I can remember going with my mother, actually, rather than my father. She would take me to the store to meet my father, and I would tag along in hopes of getting some lollipops.
At the time that the Gimbel brothers opened up the store in Philadelphia, your grandfather was known as the Merchant Prince of Philadelphia. Here's a city that at one time was the capital of our country. And your grandfather, as you say, was in some ways bigger than life.
what do you think he meant to the city of Philadelphia just because of what he and his brothers brought to that city?
Well, I think they liked him very much, the city. They always gave him a police escort wherever he wanted to go. I liked traveling with my grandfather. We had police sirens going, and it was wonderful traveling anywhere. Lights were changed. He had a policeman at all times. It was great.
When did you realize that perhaps because you're 5, 6 years old, you're getting your head touched by customers in the store, you're in a car with him and the police are escorting him? When did you realize as a young boy, this isn't like most granddads?
Well, I didn't know about that. I just thought it was nice to have all this importance, to know that you could zoom down the street and people would get out of the way. I liked it. I mean, I really didn't think about it very much. I have nothing to compare it to.
Okay, then besides having your hair ruffled, what's your first memory of the store?
Well, I liked the fact that it had a soda fountain. And there was always ice cream to be had. Little things like that were of great importance to me.
Just a kid being a kid.
I suppose you might say that. Anyway, I liked going to the store. It was fun and it was interesting. The escalators were a big, important thing to me. I could go up and down all day on the escalators and be very happy when I was 5.
Did your friends at school know that you had this really cool place to go? And did they tag along?
Well, my friends at school hated me when I appeared in the newspapers giving the key to Santa Claus. They thought I meant I believed in Santa Claus, and they gave me a good punch in the face to say you shouldn't believe in Santa Claus. That's a lot of junk. So I hated going to the store at Thanksgiving and having to give the key of the city to the Santa Claus, who was then promptly ushered into the toy department where he gave away a lot of toys to everybody but me.
You had a kind of an interesting dichotomy then as a young boy. Either you're getting escorted through lights by policemen or getting punched by friends.
It was sort of trying.
Did it toughen you at a very young age?
Well, I was always a pretty good boxer, so I was always slugging people back, and that wasn't too good for my school record.
You mentioned, let's go to Christmas first and Santa Claus. What was that like at the Gimbel store at Christmas time?
Well, it had quite a history. Originally, the Santa Claus would then I'd been in the parade about a mile or two before the end of the parade, and he would sit up top and throw lollipops and candy and stuff to everybody coming down. But the thing I couldn't forget was one Thanksgiving day, something happened to Thanksgiving. Santa Claus fell off the float he was riding and cracked his head, and his friends must have disappeared, took him to the hospital, and the parade was frozen. They couldn't go forward without Santa Claus, and nobody knew where Santa Claus was.
Because, of course, to make sure we get this, before Santa Claus can be in the store for Christmas, he has to come in the Thanksgiving Day parade.
Right, that was the custom. And when he fell off, and I guess he was a little drunk, I suppose, it was a very cold day. And my father was called up to get another Santa Claus. Well, Thanksgiving Day, no Santa Clauses are for hire. So he decided he was going to make one. He took some employee from the store and me. We had a police escort. We ran down to, I think it was called Van Horn's, was a costume place in Philadelphia, which was obviously shut for the weekend of Thanksgiving. And I remember the fireman breaking the glass in the window. That was a thrilling moment for me. And dressing this guy up like Santa Claus, and then rushing him 2 miles down the Broad Street with police escort and sirens going and everything, putting on tight. You are Santa Claus when you get to that ladder, you're going to climb it, right? Right. And off we went. The only thing was when we got to the keys to the city, I gave him the keys to the city, had to do that and pretend it was somebody else. And then eventually, I watched him try to escape when he got to the ladder. He said, I can't climb up there.
Why come? Why not climb the ladder? Was it too far?
He said, I'm afraid of heights. I can't go up a ladder to the toy store. Fireman said, you're going up that ladder. It's the last ladder you ever climbed.
All right, stop right there. In your memory, how far was that ladder up in the air?
100 feet.
Come on. Really?
No, from memory, I don't know how far it was.
Was
The
it-
ninth floor would be close to 100 feet.
Yeah, it was really that far.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Well, they pulled him up by his collar and the seat of his pants and threw him in the toy store window. I thought that was pretty good.
Did they give the poor guy a raise?
No, he said he didn't snap too fast enough. I don't know what happened really.
In future years, who was the Santa Claus then?
Well, they decided it'd be much easier if they had a fireman to be Santa Claus, one that wasn't afraid of heights. That's what they're doing to this day,
Really?
really.
To this. All right. So when you mentioned Thanksgiving Day parade, I want to get this. The recollection of the Thanksgiving Day parade that you have first and foremost. You were a little boy. The Thanksgiving Day parade, though, for what we know, began in Philadelphia. Is this correct?
It did it first started in Philadelphia, not New York as commonly supposed. But the Thanksgiving Day parade in New York was by far the most splendorous one. And I tried to go to both of them if I could. One year, one to another. I love the parade.
So really, in retrospect, the first Thanksgiving Day parade in this country that of note was the Gimbels Thanksgiving Day parade.
I believe that's correct, yes.
So Macy stole this idea.
Stolen, I don't know, they had a right to Thanksgiving Day parade, I guess.
When you were a child, did you know about the rivalry between Gimbels and
I
Macy's?
really had no feeling about it whatsoever,
You didn't know about it.
no,
It didn't exist for you.
no. The parade existed and the punch in the face existed, things like that,
The real stuff. You could feel the pain of your friends.
yeah. And the key for Santa Claus, I remember having, as I handed to him, I could feel it coming.
When you think of those days, when did it become cool with your friends to be Roger Gimbel and not get punched in the face by him? When did they no longer be little kids towards you?
I don't know exactly, but it didn't hurt that I punched him back. Great skill at that, he practiced it for all season.
Your dad, Richard. Let's talk about him. As I asked you with Ellis A., your grandfather, as we sit here, the first memory that you have of Richard as a child.
I'm not sure when you remember your father, you know. Usually for everybody, the mother is the first person that you respond to. But my father was always challenging me to do something. I was always taking a series of bravery tests. If I didn't do something my sister would do, and he'd get mad at me. Look, your sister rides the roller coaster and you won't. I said, I don't like heights that much. He said, your sister Joyce, she loves it. I said, let her go to my place, okay? And things like that were arguments that would take place about, I had 5 sisters and who would go first and who was the bravest. Those are the earliest recollections I have.
Is it true when you're about 4 or 5 years old, he would make you jump about 30 feet off a platform into the water?
What do you mean in the summertime?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I didn't have a love of swimming in the cold lake, so I was thrown into the lake. It was the system of discipline that I got used to eventually, and practiced it on my own children when the time came.
Well, it sounds like that your father, Richard, must have learned his ways from Ellis A.
I'm not sure about that, but he was always testing you in one form or another, and it was kind of fun traveling with him. He was always interesting to be with him, always on an interesting mission. He collected books. He was like a detective looking around for certain copies of books. And he'd go to a bookstore and bargain with the bookstore but I was brought along to carry the books out to the car that he'd buy. But you'd have little things that would happen like this. You'd walk into a store. Stores are rather piled up on the streets of New York, usually, where we went, and southern part of New York City. And he would walk up to a clump of books and he'd say, "How much is this book right here?" And the owner would say, "It's $2." He'd say, "What about the whole shelf?" And the guy said, "Well, I don't really want the whole shelf." He said, "Well, I'll buy the whole shelf. How much is that?" He'd say, "No, look, well, what about all the books on this side of the store?" And finally we got to a place where he'd say, "Tell you what, I'll buy the whole store. How's that?" I said, "I don't want to sell the store. I want the book. I have to buy the store." And sometimes we wound up with a store or a shelf or something like that. And then it was negotiated back, but he was very confusing that way to follow. I wasn't sympathetic to his methods, but I carried the books like a dutiful son.
We'll talk more about the books in a bit, but on this topic of being with your dad, there's a story about you guys going to a store, someplace in New York City, I think it was on 4th Avenue, where he bought a shelf of books for about $200 or whatever. And you got back into the car, and he said to you, "I don't want any of these books. I bought them all for one book."
I remember that story, yeah.
Please tell me.
Well, that's what happened. I told you about the books. He would, once he found what he wanted, he went to no end, all ends, I should say, to get the sale accomplished, and that's what he did. But we had a lot of books that I had to carry, either give back to the owner. It was a mess, is all I can tell you. But he got his book.
What was the book, do you recall?
Well, at different times he collected, for a long time it was Dickens and Poe. He looked around for stories that had Dickens or Poe in them. Or he had a aviation collection, stories about flying or Lindbergh or some adventure in the sky. He would buy the book that had that adventure, and every 10 versions of it he'd buy just a change in the title. A comma here or there made a different edition as far as he was concerned. So he was on a search that I didn't understand at all about book collecting, but it pleased me very much, and I was happy to go along on the adventure.
As a child, or then as an adult, did you ever find out where some of these books are that he was pining for, whether it was a Dickens or a special Poe or something by Payne, the one book in the collection that he had to have? And as he found things and got them from store owners, would they ever become yours? Did you ever find out where they were? Did he hide them all?
No, I didn't really follow this. I was only interested in the snatch. And once that was over and the books were in the back of the car, that was good enough for me. I got paid a quarter or something for helping him. And he would run off with the books, and that was the end of the books as far as I was concerned. I had no collection, junior collection. I wasn't trying to imitate him in any way. And I did fly with him a lot, and he had a small plane that he flew before he went into the Air Force. And I guess I learned to fly from him.
Let's talk about that then, because you're 14 years old. Your dad's getting his pilot license. You're living in Florida at the time. And he sends you up with his instructor. Once again, from the jumping off into the lake at 30 feet to riding the roller coaster, he's challenging you again. Tell me that story.
Which part of the story are you talking about now?
The ultimate ending to the story is your line when you said, which I've read your quote, "I felt like if I could handle him and that test, I could handle the Air Force."
That pet, I'm not sure what you're saying.
Well, you were 14 years old and you were living in Florida, and he was getting his
When he
flight.
had the guy test you?
He had his instructor test you to say, let me see if my son Roger has any guts.
When my father was learning to fly from the Flying Dutchman, that was the instructor, called the Flying Dutchman. He was a World War I ace. And he had this airfield. I would take my bike and ride it out to to the airfield and trying to bum a ride for one of the pilots there, see if he'd take me up. And my father said, well, I want to be sure he'll be safe on it. He talked to the Flying Dutchman. He said, I guess he did this all without my knowing it. Give him a ride that he'll never forget. Let's see what his reaction is. So I just remember getting in a plane with the Flying Dutchman, the ace, I thought was so wonderful. He taught my father to fly. The next thing I know, he turned the plane upside down. The only thing holding me between that and falling to earth was a safety belt. I was like this. It was quite a feeling. I was really frightened. And then finally the guy did a few Immelmans and turns and slow rolls and all that sort of thing. I got to where I kind of liked it. And it's sort of fun to might as well sit back and enjoy it when death is close. So I adopted that as a motto, and he did teach me a bit of things.
Like every son with their father, it seems though you had a heightened love-hate. You loved him, you respected him, at the same time, hate may be the wrong word, but you get what I'm saying. The love-hate because of him challenging you.
I didn't like being challenged or questioned or how much is 3 times 99 kind of question. It was too hard. It wasn't comfortable to be with him all that time. When I would fly, of course, sometimes I'd fly with him. And this is a small plane with two seats side by side in this case. He'd say, we were on a trip to Florida. He said, I'm tired. It's time for my nap. Would you mind flying the plane? I was about 9 or 10 years old. He just dozed off in the thing there. And I knew how to fly the plane straight and level. And about 10 minutes would go by and wake up and he'd say, what's going on? Where are we? And I said, what do you mean, where are we? How do you tell? Well, he said, well, how do we get anywhere? And he said, look at the glass bottom to the next to the pilot seat. He said, we've drifted off course. What course? And he was steering all kinds of things I didn't know anything about. He was asking me. I did learn a little bit about navigation by the time that was over several of those type trips where I had to fly without him.
Was he really asleep?
Yes. Oh no, he could nap anywhere.
Come on.
No, he did that.
He's in the air with his 9 or 10-year-old son.
Absolutely, he trusted me.
Did you trust yourself?
Certainly not. I didn't trust. All I wanted to do was save my own butt, you know. And I was just trying to look around and see if nothing would wake him up, see if he'd wake up. That didn't work. There was lots of that sort of stuff that worked. But he really was let me fly for 10, 15 minutes while he napped. Didn't think twice about it.
I'm going to jump ahead on one thing. You're in the service, World War II. You have an A-20 bomber, is what you fly, which is a single person plane. Your dad, as a colonel, came to visit you, and you took him for a ride.
Yes.
Why don't you tell me about that ride you took him for, please?
Well,
And before you say it, subconsciously, now that I'm asking you, was that 9-year-old boy flying that plane at that part of that time?
I felt I thought this is a chance for revenge. And he had come down to see me, and I was angry that he'd come down. He wanted me to change my plans to get married and so forth. And I look forward to taking him up in a plane that only had a seat for pilot 1.
Hold that thought, please. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
I don't want that to interrupt this story.
It won't come across.
It might.
You're at the top house and there's a,
Right.
cut guys,
Okay.
there's
Rolling.
rolling and action.
Those colors do look smashing on you, by the way.
Thank you.
They make your eyes pop.
Oh boy.
It's just the plaid, I don't know what it is, it's special. Special. When you were in World War II, you were in the States, and you have an A-20 bomber, which is a one-person plane, except for the bombs. However, your dad, the colonel, came to visit you, and you found a way to bring him up for a little flight. Was part of that Roger the adult, remembering Roger, that 9 or 10-year-old whose dad fell asleep on him?
You bet it was. I couldn't wait to get on. First of all, I knew he'd never flown a combat aircraft. And there was no room for anybody except there was a small passageway you could crawl forward on your belly over the bomb bay. And if I opened the bomb bay, it was straight down, and there were these two doors. I made him lie in the top of the two doors that opened up, strapped him in there. And I remember his face was against his fists like this, and there were spikes in where his chin would rest. And I couldn't wait to get him, suck up the wheels and flaps, and then do a peel up, and his chin went right into this mesh there, and I felt justified in all the things that he taught me. Came down, he was full of blood, never said a word about it. So it was only half effective.
Did he say, son, you're a good
No, he
pilot?
didn't say anything, he just said, what a wonderful trip that was, thank you.
Did you by chance open the bomb door?
I did. It was freezing temperature, and I knew half of him was frozen. He didn't stop him a bit. He said, great trip, you've really come a long ways.
Well, besides the 9 or 10-year-old who got to fly with his dad when he fell asleep for about 10 minutes, there was also one when you're about 13 or 14. At 4 o'clock in the morning, he wakes you up, someplace in Florida, because he's ditched a plane in the Everglades. What was that story about, please?
Well, he woke me up about 4 in the morning and said, we gotta get out of here before your mother knows I'm home. And he said, I put the plane down on an island in the Everglades. You gotta help me get it out. So we got in the car and felt as it took about an hour driving through the Everglades. There were dirt roads at that time. He actually found the plane. He was sitting on a large island. He said, he got in the plane, he started up the engine. He said, I'm not sure I can take off if you want it. He said, you stay in the car. He said, I'll come back and get you. If the Indians come or anybody bothers you, just lock the doors. I stayed there all day, half of the night till they came back. That was the kind of thing he was likely to do. And the Indians came, as a matter of fact. There was a reservation there, and they rocked the car. I never forgot that. I knew they were going to come and cut my throat or what was going to happen. He did that rocking business. Then they left me alone and went away, and I waited till my father came and got me. I knew he would get there eventually, but not when.
Excuse me. Had to hold that one off, excuse me. Wait a minute. Indians came to your car. American Indians
Didn't speak English.
that you know of.
Right.
And do you know what time of day this was? Was it still early morning, late night,
In the
midday?
morning, sometime in the morning.
They came to the car
I locked the door.
and sat in the seat.
Well, they couldn't open the car. They rocked it. When they got tired of that, a bunch of kids and older guys too, when they had their fun, and I was left alone until my father came. It was a typical thing would happen.
Everglades, right?
Yeah, that's a tough place to land a plane. Even tougher to take off, which he did the right thing by not taking me aboard.
Was there alligators?
Alligators?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Probably.
You didn't bother getting out.
No. I was scared.
Let's go back to Philadelphia. Your dad, the Gimbels, the department store. Tell me now what you know as an adult, what the Gimbels did. First, the 7 brothers, and then your dad, uncles, cousins, etc. And how, in some way, they were part of the change in America.
Well, the family business was what it was all about. And Gimbel had a big family with 7 Gimbels in the business to begin with, and more as time went on to a dozen Gimbels. And the family business was a way of controlling the situation like it never happened before. A department store with all these different facilities and controlled by Gimbels. And it was a good way to do business, even though you might not be so good at it. The numbers alone would crush you into seeing it your way. And it was kind of fun seeing all your cousins or your uncles and aunts, and they were all running the store, the big department store in the middle of a city like Philadelphia or New York. It was an example of control that I haven't seen elsewhere, and I hadn't seen elsewhere. It was very, very interesting.
And because during the Industrial Revolution, which our country was going through, late
That
1800s
was earlier.
into the 1900s, right, that whole time, as far as department stores, the Gimbels were one of the families, one of the groups leading the way. What do you remember being in the Philadelphia store? What departments, what kinds of things were in that store?
Well, it was good to go through a store with your family who you figured they didn't own it exactly. They ran it for the corporation. I just loved the fact that I could go to the book department and sit there and read a book. If I wanted to, nobody would disturb me. And then I could go to the elevator, and the elevator man would know me, and I'd go so forth and so on. It was kind of exciting to know that your family had power, and taught you a lot about the importance of power and the importance of having a big family running a department store. That's about all I could say.
There was something important about the Philadelphia store, and that the Gimbels, your dad and your granddad, showed the people of the area that working in a store like that was respectable as far as a job for women, for girls. This is new.
That was a great invention of theirs. The idea, they had a team of people, and they would go to places where the girl, let's say she was 17 or 18, would like to have a job. There were no jobs around. They would guarantee the girl $2 a day, 5 days a week, and safety. You know, they went to the office in daylight and came home at daylight as a rule. It was a safe way to staff the store, and very profitable. You only have to pay $10 a week per salesperson. So it put a lot of women to work. It was a very much needed and welcome event.
I imagine it also helped for sales.
I would think so. I agree.
Having attractive young women.
It was a good idea. I mean, sales girls were always in existence, but never working in a big department store. Their families, they're unmarried and teenagers, they wouldn't have a chance to come home in the evening or something like that. It was not suitable for girls until the department store made it respectable.
What other departments do you recall in the Philadelphia store?
Let's get into that.
Let's go there. Let's go there right now.
Let's
Rolling.
go there right now.
Do you have sound?
Rolling. And action.
You know, there's something about the Gimbel store in Philadelphia, aside from having the girls come and have a safe place to work, and that being a new thing, the fashion of the Gimbels may have been a leader.
I think they discovered that by having a fashion event of any kind, a beauty contest, a lecture by a prominent designer, display of clothes, those were all useful things to the public, and they made it easy for a person to come down and spend the day. That was their goal. That a woman would come down with her children or with her husband if she was visiting, and they could take advantage of the store's program in fashion or see the latest things from Paris. They would have models for them. It changed the whole feeling when they'd have a radio station of their own, and they would have events in the restaurant, in the full-size restaurant in the store. And the whole thing was a place you could spend your whole day and it'd be something to do in the way of entertainment. That was the idea.
What do you mean a radio station in the store?
Well, one of the partners was very interested in radio, and decided not only would Gimbel's have things that other stores didn't, they had their own bank, the Gimbel Brothers Bank. You could shop and deposit your money back in the store in the bank, and you could have a chance to participate in whatever the store was doing, whatever you were doing. There was always something that could be used and give back to the store, so to speak.
Women's fashion, women working, a bank.
And then a radio station was, one of the cousins, his name was Nathanson. He believed that, no, actually it was Ben Gimbel was who he was, not Nathanson. His son was Nathanson, my contemporary. Ben Gimbel liked to have several studios and give you a chance to perform if you wanted to. For example, when I was about 5 years old, he'd say, "You seen the station, Roger? Maybe you'd like to come up here and sing a song, and all your neighbors can hear the radio station, WIP. Are you singing a song? What song do you know?" I said, "I only know one song, when it's springtime in the Rockies." He said, "That'll do. Come here, you stand right here. Let me hear you sing it. When it's springtime in the Rockies, that'll do fine." He said, "Sing that, the whole song. I'll be back." He shut the door, soundproof door, left. I was singing for about an hour before he came back and got me.
You were left alone an awful lot, weren't you? Your uncle leaves you singing for an hour. Your father falls asleep on you in a plane. I want to know if this all goes back to the circus being in town. I want to hear about you being shot out of a cannon.
Well, I wasn't shot out, but it was very frightening to me. They would take me backstage. And I remember particularly my father said, "Roger, how would you like to be shot out of a cannon?" I said, "No way." He said, well, maybe we should try it. You might get to like it." And the guys around said, "Nothing to it, just let go." They put you in the cannon, and they fire you to go up in the air, they catch you in the net. I said, "Not me." My father insisted I be taken up, put in the cannon. I wasn't fired, but I was scared to death for quite a while that it would be fired. So I suppose this is one of his bravery tests to see how brave could you be to be fired from a cannon. That would make me very angry, and it did.
How long did they leave you in the cannon?
Well, I had to scramble to climb up the side of the cannon. It was not a long barrel, but it was hard to scramble out of it. It was pointing up like this, you know.
You've had some traumatic experiences in that store, haven't you?
Well, it wasn't exactly a peaceful life.
You were talking about women. I'm going to ask you about your mother in 1 second. But I'm going to get there this way. Women's fashion were big in Gimbel's. Your father, before he went to work at Gimbel's, the Gimbel's brothers sent him on a year-round trip for Gimbel's to look at things around the world. He meets your mom in Czechoslovakia. First, talk about that trip, or what you may know of that trip from talking to him, as far as the Gimbel brothers sending your dad to prepare him to work for the company.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
The fact that the Gimbel brothers were the first ones to bring in the women's fashion, and how important that was, well, before your dad worked for his father and the uncles in Gimbel stores, they sent him around the world to see fashion, to learn.
Well, that's right. He got a chance to go around the world and see what was going on, what could be useful in the store, to attract people to the store. During our discussion, you may have remembered that the rug buyer, you headed towards the rug buyer. One of the policies of the Gimbel brothers was that because they weren't all talented or good at retail business. They would find a way that the strong would support the weak. If you had a couple of dumb cousins, they could still work in the store, they'd send them to Uruguay to be the rug buyer or something like that. He wouldn't be heard of for a while, and they could continue on the store, but he stayed in the store and helped in whatever way he could. The rug buyer, as a matter of fact, was sent over to, he was a Gimbel that got into trouble making passes at the elevator girls. So they had to get rid of him. So they sent him as a rug buyer to, I think it wasn't Uruguay at that time, it was Poland or someplace. And I thought they were keeping busy, but it turns out on his way back he sent them a telegram saying that clear the street floor. He said, I bought 40,000 white gloves. It's a big fashion in Poland. We're going to have a big sale, and he'd taken all the money, $40,000, and bought white gloves with it and brought it back. I think he was choked to death when he got back, and the white gloves are still at the warehouse.
To this day.
To this day.
Your mom and your dad meeting her when he was in Czechoslovakia traveling. What's your mom's name?
Julia.
When you say Julia and you think of your mother, what do you think?
She was a tough cookie. She agreed with my father on most things, and I loved him very much, but she felt very strongly that I should do certain things. For example, when my father was flying for the 8th Air Force in England, I was at Yale. I remember her writing me a letter saying, it's about time you got off your butt and went over and fought a little bit in the war. You better join the Air Force and get going. Your father's over there and he needs company. And that had influence on me. I joined up shortly thereafter. But not very often a mother asks you to go to war.
Did your paths cross during World War II, you and your father?
Not really. He was coming back as I was going overseas. He came back in time to give me my wings. He pinned them on me as a surprise. And when I got my wings, and then he went his way and I went mine. But that's the only time I saw him during the war years. The rest of the time he was there, mostly in England and eventually Okinawa in the post-war period.
Did you know at the time that you were one of the youngest pilots in the American Air Force and he was one of the oldest? Was that discussed?
No, I never discussed it. I didn't learn it until I read the newspaper clippings later. I was the youngest pilot in the European theater. He was pretty old. He was the other way. But those things happened to us. It didn't seem like much at the time.
Your father, before you went to Yale, he went to Yale. And he was quite a character there also. What did you know about the stories he may have told you or you read his junior year when he had his tutoring classes?
Well, one idea he had, which I thought was terrific, he ran a tutoring school. And the idea was that before exams, you could come to his tutoring school, and he guaranteed that you'd pass the course. Great deal of the time, it turns out, he never studied the subject, but in studying up the subject, he learned enough so he could pass the test. And he would guarantee you passage of the test or your money back. And he, of course, included a couple of athletes. He gave free course instruction so as to keep discipline among them. But he had advertisements that he used to run in the Yale Daily News, which said, you may forget the course, but you'll never forget the cost. Yale's most expensive tutoring school, the Gimbel Tutoring School Deluxe.
I read some place where Yale itself would charge $3 for a tutor. He began at $10, but he had so much success he raised it to $35.
Whatever. It was Yale's most expensive tutoring school, and it worked. When I went there 20 years later, people were still talking about it.
Cut,
Go ahead. Okay, then we go from there into Bernard, etc. Cool?
Want me to start?
I'll start. You guys okay?
Rolling.
rolling.
Talking about your dad and Philadelphia, he was always one who was entertaining. They talked about him at Yale being the one who was the most gregarious, etc. And we know that from discussing with you how he parented you. What did he bring to the table when it came to the store in Philadelphia, to running a gimbal store?
Well, he believed that the store should expand a woman's interest in particular to the suburbs, to build suburban stores, to put in escalators that didn't exist in department stores before the Philadelphia store that he was in charge of. There were a whole flock of things that he thought the department store could achieve. One of the things, incidentally, he had was the Gimbel Brothers Bank had safety deposit boxes that happened to be big enough to store his books in, so they wouldn't get damaged. So between that and the radio station, his cousins who had different ideas about how it should be. They would give something to the Woman of the Year, and my father would come down and kiss the winning winner of the year, and sometimes get slugged for doing it. Amelia Earhart, I think, slugged it pretty good. And they had a lot of fun giving these awards and so forth.
I guess in retrospect, though, if you're gonna get hit by a woman, Amelia Earhart's a pretty good shot.
I think so.
I mean, how many guys can say?
He didn't care. He didn't care. He thought it was worth it. Listen, I can remember when he went to West Point, and they marry people every 3 minutes. They come down the stairs. For a while, he was fascinated by standing at the foot of the stairs and kissing about 15 women in a row. Thought that was good fun. I had to sit in the sidelines and watch. I had no desire to join him. I was only 12.
You talked about the family and other members, and we know where Richard is as far as his expertise. One of the other ones was his cousin Bernard. And at one time, Bernard was the president, your dad was the vice president.
Well, Bernard ran the store. There's no question about it. He was the chief man of the store. My father felt that the Philadelphia store was his baby. He should run it as he thought all the Gimbel stores should be run. The strong should support the weak. It should be Gimbel's in charge of everything. That was the whole idea of the brotherhood, of the Gimbel brothers. And that the stronger people not only should bring white gloves and rugs back from Europe, but they should have a certain style to them. I'm trying to remember the part that you're interested in.
All of it.
I'm really not sure which.
Well,
part.
go now into the Bernard thing, and that at
Yeah.
a certain point. Okay.
You talk about the strong, and I want to know your memories of Bernard.
Well, one thing that was certain, I remember being a child of 5 or 6, and Bernard Gimbel came into our dinner table and walked around on his hands by everybody's plate and gave them a spoon of this and a spoon of that. He could show off when it came to his strength. He would say, "You want to feel my muscle?" And he'd pull his shirt back. It's like somebody else's leg. He's a very strong guy. He was an intercollegiate boxing champion. And a good fighter he was. He was Gene Tunney's manager, talked Gene Tunney into resigning, which had no prize fighter ever done when he was world champion before. And but he didn't get along well with my father. My father was trying to do things that were more for the benefit of the family. Bernard, living in New York, was much closer to fashion and much closer to Wall Street. And the Wall Street efficiencies, who Bernard now believed, due to his friendship with the Wall Street people, the store should be efficient. Gimbel's didn't have to get a job there. The best man should get a job, and the hell with the family. And my father thought that was a great mistake. And while he got along with Bernard somewhat, they really fought tooth and nail over who should establish the policy of the store, as I've just said. Finally, Bernard saw no other way clear but to throw my father out of the store. He fired him. Brought somebody else in from Pittsburgh to run the store. Fired my father, and my father for a long time was out of work. But he was always seeking to come back with some sort of revenge, so I got into a proxy war over control of the store, which he lost. But one thing he didn't lose, I remember one of the recollections I have then is my father coming home, having been beat up by a couple of thugs, which had been hired by somebody at Gimbel's to stop my father when he came down to get the books, which he put into the safety deposit boxes because they fit. And he went down to get the books, and they turned off the lights, and they wouldn't let him get the books out. And then he called me, and I said, "Would I come down and hold a candle for him while I got the books?" And anyway, he got beat up, was brought home, and was in bed with bandages for a long time. Thought that was kind of rough go for him, but it didn't stop him at all. He just got better and tried new tactics to win his point. But he did lose the proxy war, and he did build his collection of books from then on. And there's really no punchline there, except that it's unusual to see your dad come home and been punched out over a book. What they actually told the fire was they moved the books that my father had from one safety deposit to another. So when he came down with the keys to his box, and the keys didn't work, they found the books had been taken and moved to another part of in the bank. And they told the bank manager to take the books, wrap them in newspapers, and throw them through our front door. He didn't want his books there. So the bank manager lost his nerve and came back, and they moved the books to another safety deposit box, a series of boxes. And when my father came to finally come and get the books, the books were there wrapped in newspaper. My father said, "These are important manuscripts, page from the Gutenberg Bible, the manuscript of Edgar Allan Poe's Raven. They've been damaged. They have newsprint all over them." And so he sued Bernard then, he was no longer with the store, about damaging the books for several $100,000 worth of damage. And during the trial itself, when the trial exactly, the hearing, I guess you'd call it, they asked, the judge asked the lawyer who was defending it, how could they decide on $57,000 as the price for this book? Who are the experts on Edgar Allan Poe and Dickens? He said, "Well, Richard Gimbel, of course, my father." So if he said it was so, that was so that's how much money they owed. He was the world's expert with Poe and Dickens and so forth. So he had a couple of licks left.
Do you recall how many books were in that safety deposit box when you went down there with him? Any idea?
It's not, the safety deposit box is a safe place, you'll find that people have built safety deposit boxes in banks to this day. It's a small room. They can put a fence up that you can keep all kinds of things in a safety deposit box in certain banks. This was that kind of a safety deposit box. It wasn't just a little box where you pull it out. There's a whole little fenced-in room where you could put tons of gold pieces or diamonds or whatever you were putting away.
And this one was full of your dad's books.
He didn't like that too much, you're right.
Did we get what you wanted?
Yes, that's,
Rolling.
rolling?
after this proxy war, your father moved you guys to Miami, and I know he got back into the business for a while there. But in Miami, like in Philadelphia, like in Maine, it seems the homes you guys lived in growing up took on his personality. Tell me about the Miami home, what he did to it, and there was a guy training a jaguar, tiger, something down there. What was that all about?
What was that about?
There was something about your father rearranged their home in Miami and took boarders on, and one of the guys on the property was training a jaguar on the property. And you guys were all not happy about it because you're 14 years old, 13 years old.
I don't really know. The other thing I remember about the house in Florida, it was a wonderful house because it had a dock. You could get to the ocean in your boat, and you could go up and down the canals. It was a great spot, but my father hired a man to help with the work around the house. And I loved the guy he hired. He taught me how to cheat at cards. And I learned about how to hide cards and so forth, and mark cards and all kinds of things. This guy turned out was on parole from prison, or for offensive stealing from. So I practiced on my sisters, and I had 5 sisters, and I practiced by taking their allowance, shooting craps with them and everything. They had lost everything they had. Till my father caught me to give it back.
When you think of your homes you grew up in, Philadelphia,
You know,
Miami, Maine, what were they like?
well, there were big rambling homes as a rule. My father had a big family, and very often they had to, as the commanding officer in the war, for example, in Dayton, Ohio, the only house that would have us take care of 5 children and 2 adults was the old officers club. So for a while we lived in the old officers club instead of a regular place. There were always special privileges you got because you had a big family, or things happened because you had a big family. For example, when he was sent to Okinawa, he hired all the people in Okinawa behind the bar. They were bartenders who had originally been painters before the war, and they couldn't paint anymore because they'd run out of paint and whatnot. My father wrote a letter to Sears Roebuck on behalf of the natives of Okinawa saying that this group of artists needs paint, and they need to be practicing artists again. Sears and Roebuck sent them enough paint to paint for years, and my father had enough paintings that he took one of the houses and put all the paintings from Okinawa up, and invited a painter by the name of Watkins, to come and evaluate the paintings. He thought he had the greatest collection of Okinawa art in the world, which was worth 0. When the expert came along and said, "I want to give you 2 cents for those paintings," my father's heart was broken. My mother took all the paintings down, and I don't know what happened to them. It was a year's worth of painting from Sierra Leone. One interesting thing about that is the native people of Okinawa showed their delight with the present by painting pictures of my father that looked like Eisenhower. He looked like General Patton. He thought it was very flattering when they put him in a wardrobe like that. We had them around the house as paintings on the wall for quite some time.
You must have laughed as you walked the hallways and saw your dad as MacArthur. One more. Go ahead.
He thanked him very much.
One more story about Okinawa was your father coming home with that dog.
Oh, that dog. Oh. Well, they had a problem in Okinawa, and that was that they had rats, and the rats ate up everybody's clothes at night and socks. It got to be huge. So they wrote to the Department of Defense and asked them what could be done about that. Well, the Department of Defense sent over what is the animal that eats rats?
Oh, yeah.
It's like a big rat itself,
A ferret.
not a ferret, anyway,
Ferret?
it's not a ferret, I'm trying to think of the name. Like a bus, anyway, it just, you can't use this thing, but the idea was I'll do it without the word, you can put the word in later if you want to. They suggested that they bring over and
Wait, cut. And get your,
Rolling.
And rolling.
action.
the, trying to think. When this, first of all, no poison seemed to kill all the rats. And when they brought in the animal that killed the rats, it ate the poison and it died too. And finally, my father had a dog during this whole thing, and the dog survived all these animals which were dropped by parachute and so forth to eat up the rats in Okinawa. He brought him home. He was in love with this dog. I had no idea what kind of dog it was. As soon as he got to our house in Pennsylvania, the dog ran away. And my father was seen for weeks running up, walking up and down the streets, hollering out the name of this dog's name, Tiger, Tiger, come here, Tiger. And he never did find him again. He was heartbroken.
The neighbors thought he was crazy.
Yes, that's true.
How old were you when you first went to Maine?
5 years old. I know that exactly because I went to Maine on a sleeper train. That was the way, you can't go there now that way, but that time the train ran to Rangeley, Maine, where we had a summer home.
You've been going your whole life.
Pretty much, yeah.
And you lived in something called Together House.
Well, as you know, my father was a big believer in the strong should support the weak and that kind of thing. He thought if he named everything Together House and things like that, which are a group, everything would be no more arguments or anything like that. But there were nothing but arguments as a result, to give it to everybody. So in certain ways he didn't succeed with his propaganda. Other ways he was most successful.
Cut. Going in.
Rolling.
When you talk about going to Maine as a 5-year-old on the train, before you guys owned the property, where'd you stay?
Well, there were these cabins they used to call them. They were sort of hotels with log cabin, boarding house type places where they had little camps where they had 2 or 3 bedrooms in them, no kitchens, and people stayed in the camps and they ate in the central dining room. And a very popular way of going up there in the summer, spending the summer with your family while the men were working in the city. And it was none of these things are in existence any longer. All those hotels have been torn down or burned down was usually the case. In terms of anything else having to do with the hotels, I can't think of them, Jennifer.
Yeah, they were walking on the boardwalk. And, I mean, these were really quite grand places. I just want to get you know.
I would call a log cabin grand, yes.
But it isn't. I mean, it didn't look like the log cabin. It looked like these beautiful, big restaurants with porches and.
Well, they were sumptuous, maybe I could say that.
Yeah,
You could sit in a rocking chair and enjoy yourself. I mean, it was a pleasant place, but there were lots of these all around. When things got too hot in Philadelphia, New York, many families that could afford it would go to these places up north, and where the weather was cool and spend the summer there. Husband would come out and visit them on weekends and so forth.
You said Philadelphia. Were you still going to Maine when you were in Florida also?
Yes. We owned a house up there at that time. We were going there, we're still going there. That's the odd part of it. It's been our family for 100 years. literally.
When you think then of Together House and your father and the strong taking care of the weak, talk about what he began in Maine, the family picture.
And how it's still going today?
Every year he took.
Oh, every year he took he piled everybody on the steps of the largest camp in Maine, Together House. He took a picture and you could see through the years who got divorced, who got married, what children were missing, who was making faces at the camera. And these people had now grown up as time went on. It was always an interesting thing to the people who went there. It wasn't no interest whatsoever to visitors whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I got a little angry at it, and we called all the people that weren't true Gimbel blood. We called them foreigners, and we had a separate picture of the foreigners taken on the steps of that. That was the end of the whole picture taking thing. Foreigners got angry, tore up the pictures. It was a nasty scene.
Is it correct where I read that when he began this whole thing, the first picture, however, every year was not just the Gimbels and their extended family, but everyone who worked there, a sailmaker, a cook, a nanny, whatever, they all got to be in the picture also?
Sometimes it depended on what year it was and what his feelings were about it. He was very generous in that respect.
And how and just finish up with how it is still going today, and all the people that are still there today.
Sure.
I mean, sisters, brothers, cousins. It worked.
We should have you on the show. Come on.
So many years later, you were mentioning that you're still going there. Why still go to Maine?
Well, I thought that way too. I was tired of it, and I wanted to see the deal my mother and father had with their children was and then they grew up and they wanted to come to Maine. They couldn't afford to pay the prices. He offered to give every child a 2-week vacation in Maine in our place, where the mother house, one of the camps that were on the outlying borders. 2 weeks with your children and anybody you wanted to bring. You had maid service, you didn't have to do any cooking, you had a dining room. You could have 2 weeks, but you couldn't have the cash instead, which is what much of my brothers and sisters wanted. They didn't want to go to Maine. But they stuck it out. So the family stayed together, and that's why they called it Together House.
Well, then one more thing. You talk about the big dining hall originally when you went there as a boy. It seems as though your mother kind of carried that on also, because she's known for doing lunches of 30, 35, 40 people almost every day.
Well, that's true. This day they give huge lunches there. My mother thought nothing of having 35 people over for dinner or for lunch. And I don't know how she got it all done, but she did a lot of entertaining. Some of which she cooked herself. And Together House was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it a lot. And our friends loved being invited there.
Do you find it interesting or appropriate that your dad, this guy you told me about, and his ideas of the family business, would also name the family cottage house Together House, something very similar to the way he ran a business?
Well, it didn't surprise me at all. He was not very good at names, my father, so Together House was about the biggest word he knew that he could use on the family, that everybody would understand.
You're a bastard sometimes. You really are.
Cut.